So there I was, Marcus Webb, 16 years old and officially the galaxy's most reluctant transfer student, standing in the docking bay of Zephyr Station Academy with a backpack full of Earth snacks and absolutely zero idea what I'd gotten myself into. My parents, bless their optimistic hearts, thought sending me to an interspecies educational facility would be, and I quote, character building. Right, because nothing builds character quite like being the only human in a school full of aliens who could probably use me as a toothpick. The station itself was impressive, I'll give it that. Massive rotating rings spinning in the void, all gleaming metal and holographic displays that hurt to look at directly. But impressive doesn't make you feel any less like fresh meat walking into a cosmic cafeteria. Principal Korshak slithered up to greet me, and when I say slithered, I mean it literally. The guy was basically a 6-foot-tall slug wearing a business suit, complete with a name tag that read, "Hello, my name is," in 17 different languages. His skin had this delightful mucus sheen that caught the artificial lighting just perfectly, and when he smiled, which he did way too often, you could see rows of tiny grinding teeth that looked like they belonged in a garbage disposal. "Welcome, welcome, young Marcus," he gurgled, extending what I assumed was a hand but looked more like a deflated balloon animal. "We are so excited to have our first human student join our diverse academic community." I shook the hand thing, trying not to think about the sticky residue it left on my palm. "Thanks, Principal Korthak. I'm, excited to be here too." Excited was definitely not the word I would have chosen, but my grandmother always said politeness was the foundation of civilization. Grandma had a lot of opinions about civilization, most of them involving proper manners and the correct seasoning of various meats. "Excellent attitude," Korthak bubbled. "Now, let me give you the grand tour. As you can see, Zephyr Station Academy serves students from 47 different species across 12 star systems. We have crystalline entities from the Silicon sector, gaseous beings from the nebula networks, and even a few hive minds from the collective colonies." We walked through corridors that seemed designed by someone who'd never heard of consistent gravity. Students floated, crawled, oozed, and occasionally teleported past us. There was a group of what looked like walking crystals having an argument that sounded like wind chimes in a tornado, and a cluster of blue-furred creatures that kept multiplying every time I blinked. "And here," Korthak announced with obvious pride, "is our state-of-the-art cafeteria, serving cuisine from across the known galaxy." Through the transparent aluminum windows, I could see a massive dining hall, filled with the strangest lunch rush I'd ever witnessed. Some students were photosynthesizing under grow lamps, others were absorbing what looked like liquid metal, and one table was literally eating the furniture. "The lunch period operates on a strict hierarchical system," Korthak explained, his voice dropping to what I assumed was meant to be a conspiratorial whisper but sounded more like a garbage disposal with hiccups. "Students are seated according to their species' position on the Galactic Food Chain Index. It maintains order and prevents any unfortunate digestive incidents." I watched a group of small, rabbit-like creatures huddled nervously in one corner, while larger, more intimidating species claimed the prime real estate near the food dispensers. Something about the whole setup made my grandmother's voice echo in my head, one of her many lectures about bullies and the proper way to handle them. But looking at some of these students, I was pretty sure Grandma's usual advice about standing up straight and speaking with confidence might need some serious modification. "Any questions, Marcus?" Korthak asked, his slug-like features arranging themselves into what I think was meant to be an encouraging expression. Just one, I thought, watching a particularly massive creature lumber past with what looked like 3 smaller students dangling from its claws. What exactly have my parents signed me up for? The answer to my question came thundering into view about 30 seconds later, and let me tell you, it was not the kind of answer you want delivered in person. Picture, if you will, 12 feet of pure reptilian nightmare fuel strutting through the cafeteria like he owned the place. Which, judging by everyone's reaction, he pretty much did. Vextar the Destroyer, and yes, that was actually his name, according to the student roster Korthak nervously consulted, was what happened when evolution decided to take the concept of apex predator and dial it up to 11. Scales the color of dried blood covered a frame that looked like someone had crossbred a T-Rex with a professional wrestler, and then fed the result nothing but protein shakes and pure aggression for 16 years. His head was all teeth and attitude, with eyes like yellow spotlights that seemed to catalog every potential victim in his field of vision. When he walked, and I use the term loosely because it was more like a controlled avalanche, students scattered like leaves in a hurricane. The rabbit creatures I'd noticed earlier literally vanished into thin air. apparently having evolved some kind of emergency teleportation response. "Ah," Principal Korthak said, his voice taking on the tone most people reserve for discussing terminal illnesses or tax audits. "That would be Vextar. He's from the carnivore caste of the Draconi sector. Lovely species, really. Very traditional in their social interactions." Traditional. Right. Because that's what you call it when someone's idea of making friends involves seeing who fits in their mouth. I watched as Vextar approached a table of blue-furred creatures who'd been peacefully sharing what looked like crystallized space plankton. The conversation, if you could call it that, was brief and entirely one-sided. Vextar extended one massive clawed hand, palm up, and made a sound that was somewhere between a growl and a demand for immediate compliance. The blue creatures frantically emptied their meal containers into his hand, their fur shifting to a pale, terrified white. "The lunch money system," Korthak explained with the enthusiasm of someone describing a root canal. "It's a time-honored tradition among the more, shall we say, dominant species. Helps maintain the natural order of things." Natural order. My grandmother's favorite wooden spoon. This wasn't natural order. This was a protection racket with scales. Vextar moved from table to table like some kind of prehistoric tax collector, and every single student forked over whatever they had without so much as a whimper of protest. The crystalline entities gave him what looked like mineral supplements, the gaseous beings condensed themselves into portable snack packets, and the hive minds collectively agreed to sacrifice their dessert rations. But here's the thing that really got me. Vextar wasn't just taking their food. He was taking their dignity along with it. I watched a group of what appeared to be sentient plants literally wilt as he approached, their leaf faces drooping with defeat before he even opened his mouth. These weren't just students being bullied. They were an entire ecosystem living in fear of one oversized lizard with an attitude problem. And then, because the universe apparently has a sense of humor that runs toward the sadistic, those yellow spotlight eyes turned in my direction. Vextar had finished his rounds of the established victims, and was now conducting what could only be described as a threat assessment of the new kid, his massive head tilted to one side, like a predator trying to decide if something was worth the effort of killing. The cafeteria went dead silent. Even the students who'd been safely out of Vextar's usual rotation stopped what they were doing to watch. I could practically feel their collective thought process. "Oh good, fresh meat. Maybe he'll leave us alone for a while." Vextar began moving toward me with the slow, deliberate pace of something that had never encountered genuine resistance and didn't expect to start now. Each footstep sounded like a small earthquake, and I swear the floor plates actually creaked under his weight. His claws, and I'm talking talons that could probably open a can of soup or disembowel a space whale with equal ease, flexed in what I assumed was anticipation. Principal Korthak had mysteriously developed urgent business elsewhere and slithered away with impressive speed for someone without actual legs. The remaining faculty members suddenly found their meal monitoring duties absolutely fascinating and refused to make eye contact. So there I stood, Marcus Webb, human teenager, armed with nothing but a backpack full of earth snacks and my grandmother's voice in my head telling me to always stand up to bullies, sweetheart, because they're usually just big cowards underneath all that bluster. "Yeah, Grandma, but I'm pretty sure you never met a 12-foot reptilian death machine when you came up with that particular piece of wisdom." Vextar stopped about 3 feet away, close enough that I could smell his breath, which was exactly as pleasant as you'd expect from something that apparently gargled with liquid fear every morning. He looked down at me with those yellow eyes, and I could practically see him calculating how many bites it would take to make me disappear entirely. Then he smiled, revealing teeth that belonged in a museum of prehistoric nightmares, and spoke in a voice like grinding stone. "New meat. Time to pay tribute." Now, I want to be clear about something here. When a 12-foot apex predator demands tribute from you in front of an audience that's already planning your memorial service, the normal human response involves some combination of running, crying, and possibly offering to write your will on the nearest napkin. But here's the thing about growing up with my grandmother. Normal responses got trained out of you pretty early. Usually around the time she started teaching you that the proper way to handle bullies was with a smile, and the kind of confidence that comes from knowing exactly what you're packing for lunch. So instead of doing any of the sensible things, like fainting or spontaneously developing teleportation powers, I reached into my backpack and pulled out the brown paper bag that had been carefully packed that morning by the most dangerous woman in the galaxy. Not that Vextar knew that yet. "Tribute?" I said. And I swear my voice didn't even crack, which was honestly a minor miracle considering the circumstances. "You know what, big guy? You look hungry. Lucky for you, my grandmother packed extra. The cafeteria somehow got even quieter, which I hadn't thought was physically possible. Every alien eye, sensor, and consciousness detection device in the place was focused on what had to be the most spectacular display of human stupidity they'd ever witnessed. I could practically hear their collective thought process. Did the new meat just offer to feed the apex predator? Is this some kind of elaborate suicide ritual? Vexstar's massive head tilted the other way, confusion replacing anticipation in those yellow spotlights. This clearly wasn't going according to his usual script. His prey was supposed to cower and hand over whatever pathetic sustenance they'd brought, not offer to share like they were at some kind of interspecies picnic. "You mock Vexstar," he rumbled, leaning down until his face was about 6 inches from mine. Up close I could see that his scales had little scars on them, probably from other students who'd tried to fight back, with predictably unsuccessful results. His breath was like standing downwind from a barbecue pit that had been used exclusively for cooking sulfur and regret. "Mock you? Buddy, I'm trying to help you out here." I opened the brown paper bag and started unpacking its contents with the same casual confidence my grandmother used when she was about to prove a point to the neighborhood association. See, the thing about human grandmothers is that they don't just pack lunch. They pack solutions to problems you didn't even know you had. First out was the sandwich, wrapped in wax paper with "Marcus, eat all your vegetables" written on it in grandmother's careful handwriting. It looked innocent enough, just thick-cut bread with what appeared to be meatloaf and some kind of red sauce peeking out around the edges. The red sauce, however, was not ketchup. My grandmother's red sauce had sent grown men crying to their mothers and once caused our mailman to request a transfer to a different route. Next came the thermos, dented steel with a label that read "Grandma's Special Broth, warning, not responsible for spontaneous perspiration." The thing was still steaming slightly even though it had been packed 3 hours ago, which should have been everyone's first clue that we weren't dealing with ordinary soup here. And finally, the pièce de résistance, a small tin container marked "Grandma's Special Cookies, 1 per customer, no exceptions." The tin was warm to the touch and smelled like home, if home was located somewhere between a bakery and a chemical weapons facility. The assembled crowd of alien students leaned forward despite themselves. Food curiosity apparently was universal. Even Vexstar's predatory focus seemed to shift from intimidation to genuine interest. His nostrils, which were roughly the size of subway tunnels, flared as he caught the scent of grandmother's cooking. "Human food?" he asked, his voice losing some of its threatening rumble and gaining something that might have been actual curiosity. "Vexstar has never consumed human sustenance." "Well, today's your lucky day then," I said, unwrapping the sandwich and holding it out like a peace offering. "My grandmother always said the best way to make friends is to share a meal. Of course, she also said the best way to end conflicts is to make sure everyone walks away satisfied, and Grandma's cooking has a 100% satisfaction rate." Vexstar stared at the sandwich like it might explode, which wasn't entirely an unreasonable concern given my grandmother's approach to seasoning. Around us, the cafeteria held its collective breath. This was either going to be the most spectacular diplomatic breakthrough in galactic history, or they were about to witness a human become the first student to poison an apex predator with a meatloaf sandwich. "You share food with Vexstar the Destroyer?" he asked, genuine confusion creeping into his voice, "even though Vexstar takes tribute from all lesser beings." "Hey," I shrugged, channeling every ounce of my grandmother's matter-of-fact confidence. "Everyone's got to eat, right? Besides, wait until you try this. Grandma's meatloaf is legendary back on Earth. Fair warning, though, she tends to go a little heavy on the seasoning." Vexstar reached out with one massive claw and carefully took the sandwich, handling it like it was made of spun glass instead of bread and impending regret. The entire cafeteria leaned forward in anticipation. And then, because 12-foot apex predators apparently have the same curiosity that killed the cat, Vexstar took a bite. You know that moment in action movies where everything goes into slow motion right before the explosion? That's exactly what happened, except instead of a bomb going off, it was my grandmother's meatloaf making contact with an alien digestive system that had absolutely no evolutionary preparation for what was about to happen. For exactly 3 seconds, Vexstar chewed thoughtfully, his massive jaw working through what was probably the most complex flavor profile his species had encountered since they'd crawled out of whatever primordial swamp had produced them. His yellow eyes blinked once, twice, and I could practically see his brain trying to process the information his taste buds were sending. Then his pupils dilated to roughly the size of dinner plates. "By the 7 moons of Draconis," he whispered, his voice taking on a strangled quality that suggested his vocal cords were currently being held hostage by my grandmother's ghost pepper collection. What sorcery is this? Now, I should probably mention that when Grandma said she went a little heavy on the seasoning, what she actually meant was that she'd declared culinary warfare on anything resembling bland food. Her meatloaf contained ghost peppers, Carolina Reapers, scorpion peppers, and something she called Satan's own seasoning blend that she ordered from a catalog that probably required a background check. Vextar's scales began changing color, shifting from dried blood red to something approaching fire-ginned crimson. Steam, actual visible steam, started rising from his nostrils. His massive frame began to vibrate like a tuning fork, and his claws dug gouges in the floor as he tried to maintain his composure. Interesting reaction, I observed, pulling out the thermos with the casual confidence of someone who'd grown up building immunity to grandmother's cooking. Want to try the soup? It's her special broth recipe. The assembled crowd of alien students was now pressed against the walls, presumably in case Vextar decided to breathe fire or explode or do whatever apex predators do when they encounter Earth-level spice concentrations. Principal Korthak had returned and was making frantic notes on a datapad, probably updating the school's insurance policies. Vextar, meanwhile, was discovering that human, mild seasoning operated on a completely different scale than anything in his previous experience. His breathing had become rapid and shallow, his massive chest heaving as he tried to process what was happening to his mouth. Tears, actual tears, were leaking from those yellow spotlight eyes. "More," he gasped, reaching for the thermos with shaking claws. "Vextar requires more of this warrior sustenance." I unscrewed the cap, and immediately the entire cafeteria filled with the aroma of my grandmother's special broth, which was basically chicken stock that had been weaponized through the liberal application of every hot sauce known to humanity. The smell alone caused several students to evacuate the immediate area, and I'm pretty sure I saw one of the gaseous beings briefly solidify from sheer olfactory shock. "Fair warning," I said, handing him the thermos. "Grandma always said this one's got some kick to it." Vextar tilted back his massive head and poured about half the thermos directly down his throat. The result was immediate and spectacular. His entire body lit up like a Christmas tree, scales shifting through colors that probably didn't have names yet. He made a sound that was part roar, part scream, and part religious experience. But here's the thing that surprised everyone, myself included. Instead of collapsing, or demanding medical attention, or declaring war on the entire human species, Vextar started laughing. Not the cruel, predatory chuckle I'd expected, but genuine, delighted laughter that shook the floor plates and probably registered on seismic equipment 3 sectors away. "Magnificent!" he bellowed, his voice now carrying a slight rasp that suggested his vocal cords had just gone through basic training. "This burns like the heart of a dying star. What warrior culture created such battle food?" "That would be Earth grandmothers," I said, grinning despite myself. "They're basically the galaxy's most dangerous secret weapon, except they disguise themselves as sweet old ladies who knit scarves and give out unsolicited life advice." Vextar wiped his streaming eyes with the back of one massive claw, smearing tears and what might have been nose fire across his scales. "Your grandmother is clearly a warrior of the highest caliber. Vextar has fought acid-spitting void beasts and thought himself brave. But this requires courage beyond measure." The other students were starting to creep closer, drawn by curiosity and the growing realization that their 12-foot nightmare was currently bonding with the new kid over lunch. The blue-furred creatures had returned to their original color and were peering around corners, their expressions shifting from terror to fascination. "Oh, we're not done yet," I said, producing the cookie tin with a flourish that would have made my grandmother proud. "The real test of your warrior spirit is still coming. These are Grandma's special cookies, and they come with what she likes to call combat application." Vextar's eyes, still streaming from the broth, focused on the innocent-looking tin with the intensity of someone who'd just discovered that lunch could be a contact sport. Around us, the cafeteria had filled with whispers in 17 different languages, all probably variations of, "Is the human actually trying to kill him with dessert?" "Challenge accepted, Warrior Marcus," Vextar rumbled, his voice carrying a new note of respect. "Present your grandmother's final weapon." I opened the tin, and the smell of chocolate chip cookies mixed with something that was definitely not standard baking ingredients filled the air. Vextar leaned down to investigate, and I could practically see his predatory instincts warning him that he was about to encounter something far more dangerous than anything he'd faced in traditional combat. He was right, but not in the way anyone expected. The cookies looked innocent enough, which should have been everyone's first warning sign. Golden brown, perfectly circular, with chocolate chips arranged in what appeared to be a completely random pattern, but which I knew from experience was actually my grandmother's secret way of maximizing chocolate-to-cookie ratio for optimal flavor impact. They smelled like home and happiness and the kind of maternal love that could stop wars or start them, depending on who was doing the eating. What they didn't look like was the galactic equivalent of a controlled substance, which is essentially what they were. "Your final weapon appears pleasant," Vextar observed, his massive head tilted in that confused predator way that suggested his instincts were sending him mixed signals. On one hand, the cookies smelled amazing. On the other hand, he'd just experienced what human mild seasoning could do to a digestive system that had evolved on nothing but raw space beef and intimidation. "That's the beauty of Grandma's cooking," I said, picking up one of the cookies and holding it out like a peace treaty written in flour and butter. "She believes in the element of surprise. See, most species in the galaxy don't actually use refined sugar in their diets, and caffeine, that's basically unknown outside of Earth." The crowd of alien students pressed closer, their curiosity overriding their survival instincts. Principal Korchek was frantically taking notes, probably updating the Academy's first aid protocols to include sugar shock and caffeine poisoning. Vextar took the cookie with surprising delicacy, his massive claws handling it like it was made of spun glass and explosive potential. Which, to be fair, it kind of was. My grandmother's cookies contained enough refined sugar to power a small spacecraft and enough caffeine to wake the dead, assuming the dead were interested in experiencing a sugar rush that could be seen from orbit. "What is this caffeine substance?" he asked, examining the cookie with the intense focus of someone trying to defuse a bomb. "And what manner of battle enhancement does refined sugar provide?" "Well," I said, settling back to watch what was about to become either the best or worst diplomatic incident in galactic history. "Caffeine is what humans use to achieve temporary superhuman alertness and energy. And refined sugar? Let's just say it's what we give to our young to make them run around in circles until they collapse from exhaustion." Vextra's eyes widened slightly. "You feed combat stimulants to your offspring." "Every birthday party and Halloween," I confirmed cheerfully. "We call it building character." The 12-foot apex predator stared at the innocent-looking cookie, then at me, then back at the cookie. Around us, the cafeteria had gone dead silent again, except now it was the silence of anticipation rather than terror. Even the faculty members had stopped pretending to be busy and were openly watching. "Vextar accepts this challenge," he declared with the solemnity of someone about to attempt something historically stupid. "If human younglings can survive these combat stimulants, then Vextar the Destroyer shall prove his warrior spirit." He bit into the cookie. For approximately 5 seconds, nothing happened. Vextar chewed thoughtfully, his expression suggesting pleasant surprise at the sweetness. His shoulders relaxed slightly, and I could see him thinking that maybe, just maybe, he'd found something from the human arsenal that wouldn't require medical attention. Then the sugar hit his bloodstream. The change was immediate and spectacular. Vextar's pupils, which had finally returned to normal size after the broth incident, suddenly dilated again. But this time, instead of the shocked expansion of someone encountering weapons-grade spice, they dilated with the manic intensity of someone who'd just mainlined pure energy. His massive frame began to vibrate, but not with pain this time. This was the vibration of a 12-foot apex predator experiencing his first sugar rush, and the result was something that had to be seen to be believed. "Be the 7 moons and all the stars beyond," Vextar bellowed, his voice taking on a pitch and enthusiasm that suggested his vocal cords were currently running on rocket fuel. "What magnificent power flows through Vextar's mighty form?" He began pacing in rapid circles, his massive feet making the floor shake with each hyperactive step. His claws were flexing and unflexing in patterns that looked suspiciously like someone trying to type on an invisible keyboard at light speed. "This is incredible!" Vextar feels as though he could wrestle a star whale, or organize his collection of intimidation trophies, or perhaps compose epic poetry about the glory of battle. Does anyone have writing implements? Vextar has sudden urge to create artistic expressions. Father, The caffeine was hitting him now too, combining with the sugar to create what could only be described as the galaxy's most dangerous case of hyperactivity. His speech pattern had shifted from the slow, menacing rumble of an apex predator to the rapid-fire chatter of someone who just consumed their body weight in espresso. Also, has anyone noticed how incredibly fascinating everything is right now? These wall panels have 17 different metallic components, and the lighting system operates on a rotating frequency pattern. And that small blue creature in the corner has the most remarkably symmetrical fur patterns. The blue-furred student he'd pointed at actually preened a little, apparently pleased to be complimented on their symmetrical fur by the school's most feared predator. And Marcus, Vextar spun toward me with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for religious conversions or lottery winnings. Marcus, friend Marcus, warrior Marcus, your grandmother is clearly the greatest military strategist in galactic history. This combat enhancement is beyond compare. Vextar feels friendship. Deep, meaningful friendship. Also, does anyone else feel like running several kilometers? Or perhaps engaging in rapid problem-solving exercises? Around us, the other students were staring in open amazement. The creature who'd terrorized them for months was now bouncing on his feet like an overexcited puppy, albeit a 12-foot puppy with claws and teeth that could bisect a space cruiser. Friendship? Asked one of the crystalline entities, their voice chiming with disbelief. Vextar speaks of friendship? Yes, friendship, Vextar declared, throwing his massive arms wide in a gesture that would have been threatening 5 minutes ago, but now just looked enthusiastic. All beings shall be friends of Vextar. We shall share meals and exchange cultural knowledge and perhaps engage in group study sessions. I grinned, watching as the most feared bully in the galaxy transformed into the most caffeinated diplomat in the known universe. My grandmother always said her cookies could bring out the best in people. I just never thought that would include 12-foot apex predators. That's the power of Grandma's secret ingredient, I announced to the stunned crowd. Love, sugar, and enough caffeine to jumpstart a moon. And that, ladies, gentlemen, and assorted sentient beings across the galaxy, is how Marcus Webb and his grandmother's lunch revolutionized interspecies diplomacy and, accidentally, created the most hyperactive friendship in the known universe. 3 weeks later, the cafeteria at Zephyr Station Academy looked like something out of a utopian fever dream. Vextar the Destroyer, who had officially changed his name to Vextar the Friend Maker during his second sugar crash, had established what he called the daily friendship feast at the center table. Every lunch period, he could be found there with his lunch buddy Marcus, enthusiastically sharing whatever Earth delicacies had arrived in the latest care package from Grandma Webb. The lunch money extortion system had been replaced by something Vextar called voluntary snack appreciation contributions, which basically meant everyone brought something to share and nobody got their dignity confiscated along with their dessert. The blue-furred creatures had started bringing crystallized space honey. The gaseous beings condensed themselves into flavor enhancement clouds, and the hive minds collectively agreed that potluck lunches were significantly more efficient than terror-based resource redistribution. Principal Korthak had stopped taking stress medication and started taking notes instead. The Academy's interspecies conflict reports had dropped to 0. Academic performance was up 47%, and they'd had to expand the cafeteria twice to accommodate what the administration was calling the Webb effect. Marcus, Vextar said one Tuesday afternoon, carefully dividing a care package of Grandma's chocolate chip cookies among a table that now included representatives from all 47 species in the Academy. Vextar has been thinking. This was always a dangerous statement from someone whose thought processes now operated on a permanent sugar and caffeine high, but I'd learned to roll with it. What about, buddy? Your grandmother, he said, his voice taking on the reverent tone most species reserved for discussing deity figures or really good investment opportunities. Vextar believes she may be the most powerful being in the galaxy. The assembled students nodded in solemn agreement. Over the past 3 weeks, they'd all experienced the transformative power of Earth grandmother cuisine. The crystalline entities claimed her oatmeal raisin cookies had achieved perfect mineral balance. The photosynthetic species had discovered that her brownies somehow enhanced chlorophyll production, and the hive minds had collectively concluded that her banana bread represented the pinnacle of unified consciousness cuisine. She's definitely something special, I agreed, watching as Vextar carefully portioned out cookies with the precision of someone conducting diplomatic negotiations. His sugar-crashed mood swings had mellowed into a kind of permanent, low-level enthusiasm that made him surprisingly good at conflict resolution, mostly because it was impossible to stay angry at someone who was genuinely excited about your problems and wanted to help solve them immediately. Vextar has composed 17 poems about her culinary warfare capabilities, he announced proudly. Also, Vextar has sent a formal request to the Draconis High Command, recommending her for honorary membership in the Galactic Defense Force. You did what now? I nearly choked on my sandwich, which was today's offering from the care package. Peanut butter and jelly with what Grandma's note described as just a touch of hot sauce for flavor. Honorary membership, Vexstar repeated, his tail wagging with excitement. Yes, wagging. Apparently apex predators do that when they're permanently caffeinated and happy. Any being capable of transforming galactic social dynamics through baked goods clearly possesses strategic capabilities beyond measure. Also, the High Command was very impressed by Vexstar's poetry. Principal Korthax slithered over to our table, his mucus sheen positively glowing with administrative satisfaction. Marcus, I've just received word from the Galactic Education Council. They want to establish the WEB program at academies across 17 star systems. The WEB program? Mandatory grandmother-based cultural exchange initiatives, he explained cheerfully. They're calling it the most significant breakthrough in interspecies relations since the invention of universal translation matrices. Your grandmother is being invited to address the council next month. I tried to imagine my grandmother, all 5 feet 2 inches of her, standing in front of the Galactic Education Council explaining her philosophy of solving problems through proper seasoning and adequate cookie distribution. The mental image was both terrifying and oddly comforting. She'll love that, I said finally. Grandma always said her cooking was meant to bring people together. I just don't think she expected people to include the entire galaxy. Vexstar stood up suddenly, which still caused half the cafeteria to flinch reflexively, and raised his thermos of what was now his daily dose of Grandma's special broth. A toast, he declared, his voice carrying across the dining hall. To Grandmother Webb, warrior of the kitchen, destroyer of hunger and bringer of universal friendship through superior baking. The entire cafeteria rose as one, raising their various eating implements and food containers in salute. 47 different species, united in appreciation for one Earth grandmother's approach to conflict resolution through carbohydrate loading. And as I sat there, surrounded by friends I never could have imagined making and watching the galaxy's former most feared predator get emotional about cookie distribution logistics, I couldn't help but think that maybe my parents had been right about this whole character-building thing. Though I was definitely going to ask Grandma to pack extra cookies in the next care package. Vexstar had started sharing his poetry during lunch, and apparently diplomatic relations worked better when everyone was too sugar high to properly critique his rhyme schemes. After all, as Grandma always said, the right recipe can solve just about any problem, even if the problem happens to be 12 feet tall and used to terrorize people for lunch money. The galaxy, it turned out, was just really, really hungry for some home cooking.